17. That's how old I was when my sister Maya poured boiling water down my arm while smiling. Not by accident. Not in anger. Just because she could. My name is Elena Martinez, and that night, 3 weeks before graduation, was the last time I would ever be anyone's victim. The kitchen tiles were cold against my knees as I knelt there, skin bubbling and peeling, while Maya calmly lit a vanilla candle and turned up the television volume. The smell of burned flesh mixed with artificial vanilla, a combination that still makes my stomach turn 5 years later. But that night, as I wrapped my arm in an ice-soaked bedsheet and bit down on a wooden spoon to keep from screaming, something crystallized in my mind with perfect, terrifying clarity. I was done being their victim. I was done being invisible. And most importantly, I was done underestimating my own capacity for patient, methodical destruction. The house where I grew up wasn't a home. It was a carefully constructed hierarchy of cruelty. At the top sat my mother Victoria, a woman who wielded disappointment like a scalpel and had perfected the art of emotional surgery without anesthesia. She was beautiful once, before bitterness carved lines around her mouth and alcohol bloated her face into something resembling perpetual disgust. Maya, my older sister by 3 years, inherited Victoria's beauty but amplified her cruelty. Where Victoria was coldly calculating, Maya was impulsively vicious. She had the kind of Instagram-perfect looks that made strangers stop and stare, but up close, you could see the emptiness behind her eyes, like looking into beautifully decorated rooms with no furniture inside. And then there was me. The accident. The disappointment. The one who cleaned up after everyone else's messes while they lived their curated lives. I worked 2 jobs through high school. Romano's diner where I smelled like grease and cigarettes, and weekend shifts at a dry cleaner where I pressed other people's expensive clothes while wearing the same 3 outfits from Goodwill on rotation. My father existed somewhere in the house like a ghost, present but not really there, lost in bottles of cheap whiskey and memories of whatever man he used to be before Victoria's ambitions drained him dry. Sometimes he'd look at me with genuine confusion, asking Victoria, "Who's the neighbor girl in our kitchen?" Those moments hurt worse than Maya's outright cruelty because at least she acknowledged I existed, even if only as a target. The night that changed everything started like any other. I'd pulled a double shift at Romano's, covering for another waitress who'd called in sick. My feet felt like they were walking on broken glass, my uniform was stained with ketchup and coffee, and I had exactly $47 in tips crumpled in my apron pocket. Not enough for the graduation dress I'd been saving for, but enough to maybe buy groceries so we wouldn't have to eat ramen for the 4th night in a row. Maya was in the kitchen when I got home, posed against the marble countertop like she was shooting for her Instagram story. She wore a silk robe that cost more than I made in a month. Her perfectly manicured nails wrapped around a wine glass that definitely wasn't her first of the evening. Everything about her looked expensive and effortless. The kind of beauty that made people assume she was someone important. "Look what crawled home," she said without looking up from her phone. Her voice carried that particular tone she'd perfected. Bored cruelty, like I was barely worth the energy it took to insult me. "Did you remember to shower off the poor people's smell before coming inside?" I didn't respond. I'd learned years ago that engaging with Maya only fed her appetite for drama. Instead, I moved toward the stove, reaching for the kettle to make instant noodles. My usual dinner after everyone else had eaten whatever Victoria had ordered from the expensive Thai place downtown. "Don't ignore me," Maya snapped, finally looking up from her phone. Her eyes had that glassy, wine-drunk quality that always preceded her worst moments. "I'm talking to you, Elena. Or should I call you what you really are? The family charity case." The kettle was almost at a rolling boil, steam beginning to whistle from its spout. I kept my back to her, focusing on opening a packet of ramen seasoning, when I felt her presence behind me. Too close. Predatory. "You know what I think," she continued, her voice dropping to that fake sweet tone that always preceded maximum cruelty. "I think you actually enjoy this. Being beneath us. Cleaning up our messes. It's all you'll ever be good for, isn't it? The help." That's when she moved. Swift and deliberate, like she'd been planning it all along. Her hand closed around the kettle handle, and before I could process what was happening, Scalding water cascaded down my right arm like liquid fire. The pain was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Immediate, total, consuming. It felt like every nerve ending in my arm had been connected to a live wire. I screamed, a sound I didn't know I was capable of making, and dropped to the kitchen floor as my skin began to blister and peel in real time. "Oops," Maya said softly, setting the kettle back on the stove with the same casual precision she'd used to place a wine glass on a coaster. "Accidents happen." Through my screaming and the sound of my own skin sizzling, I heard footsteps. Victoria appeared in the doorway wearing her silk nightgown, her face showing not concern or horror, but irritation, like I was a dog that had tracked mud through her pristine house. "What's all this noise?" she demanded, surveying the scene with cold calculation. Maya stood there looking innocent, phone still in hand like nothing had happened. I writhed on the floor, clutching my burning arm, looking up at my mother with what must have been desperate hope for help, for comfort, for any shred of maternal instinct. Victoria's response will haunt me until the day I die. That's what happens when garbage thinks it belongs at the family table. She turned and walked away. Maya giggled, actually giggled, and followed her out, leaving me alone on the kitchen floor with my arm on fire and the vanilla candle flickering cheerfully on the counter like nothing had happened. I spent that night in the bathroom with my arm submerged in a sink full of ice water, biting down on a washcloth to keep from making noise. The pain was so intense it made me nauseous, but worse than the physical agony was the crystal-clear realization of my situation. I was completely alone. No hospital. No insurance. No help. And if I missed graduation because of an emergency room visit, I'd lose the job offer at Henderson's Bakery. The only path I had out of this house and away from these people who saw me as less than human. So I treated myself. Ice water baths every hour. Aloe vera gel I stole from Victoria's bathroom cabinet. Bandages I bought with my tip money from the pharmacy, telling the concerned clerk I'd had a cooking accident. For 3 weeks, I lived with constant grinding pain while pretending everything was fine. But something else was happening during those sleepless nights when I sat in the bathroom, running cold water over my blistered skin. I was thinking, planning, learning. I started by watching Maya more carefully. Her Instagram account showed a lifestyle that didn't match our family's actual income. Designer bags, expensive dinners, spa days, shopping trips to Beverly Hills. Where was the money coming from? Maya worked part-time at a boutique that paid minimum wage, but she lived like a trust fund baby. The answer came when I found my old school papers in Victoria's desk drawer. Papers with my social security number and personal information that I'd filled out for college applications. Maya had been using my identity for years. Credit cards, online loans, even a lease agreement for a car I'd never seen. She'd built her fake lifestyle on my stolen credit, then bragged about it on social media like it was a joke. "Thanks for the shopping money, sis." Face-blowing x2hearts #sisterly love #treat yourself, read one post from 2 years ago, accompanied by photos of her in a designer dress that cost more than I made in 6 months. Victoria was running her own con. She'd been using Maya's fake Instagram influence to attract wealthy men from their church group, convincing them she was the mother of a successful influencer who needed investment opportunities. I found emails where she'd solicited thousands of dollars from lonely widowers, promising returns on Maya's imaginary business ventures. My father's contribution to the family chaos was simpler but no less destructive. He was gambling away what little legitimate money we had on online poker, then drinking himself into oblivion when he lost. The basement reeked of whiskey and failure, littered with empty bottles and unpaid bills he'd hidden from Victoria. They were all living lies, sustained by theft, fraud, and delusion. And they thought I was too stupid, too insignificant, too broken to ever pose a threat to their carefully constructed house of cards. That was their first and most fatal mistake. While my arm healed, badly, leaving a twisted, ugly scar that would never fully fade, I threw myself into learning everything I could about the world they thought I'd never understand. I checked out books from the library on business law, debt collection, financial fraud investigation. I enrolled in online courses using the computer at the local library, studying accounting, legal procedures, corporate structures. The job at Henderson's bakery became my salvation in more ways than one. Mrs. Henderson was the first adult who'd ever treated me with genuine kindness. She noticed my work ethic, my attention to detail, the way I could memorize orders and calculate change faster than the register. When she found out I was good with numbers, she started teaching me about business operations, inventory management, profit margins, tax preparation. "You've got a sharp mind, Elena," she told me one afternoon as we reconciled the day's receipts. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I saved every dollar I could, living on leftover pastries and the free meals Mrs. Henderson insisted I take home. But money wasn't the only thing I was accumulating. I was collecting evidence. Screenshots of Maya's fraudulent posts. Copies of documents she'd forged with my information. Records of Victoria's email correspondence with her victims. My father's gambling debts and the liens that were piling up against the house. By spring, I had enough evidence to destroy them all. But destruction wasn't my goal. I wanted something more elegant, more permanent. I wanted to turn their own greed and cruelty into the weapons that would dismantle their lives piece by piece. I enrolled in community college business courses using grants and scholarships I'd researched obsessively. My guidance counselor was amazed at my dedication, working full-time at the bakery, maintaining a 4.0 GPA, and somehow finding time to start my own small business. What she didn't know was that everything I was learning had a single, focused purpose: systematic revenge. The business I registered was called Ember Financial Solutions, a legitimate debt collection and financial consulting company. The name wasn't coincidental. Like a phoenix rising from ashes, I was building something powerful from the destruction they tried to rain down on me. My first major acquisition was Victoria's debt portfolio. She defaulted on 6 credit cards over the past 2 years, racking up $47,000 in charges for Maya's fake lifestyle and her own desperate attempts to maintain appearances. When debt goes into default, credit card companies often sell it to collection agencies for pennies on the dollar just to get it off their books. I bought Victoria's entire debt portfolio for $3,200. The beauty of the system was its cold, legal precision. Once I owned their debt, I had every right to collect it using any legal means necessary. Wage garnishment, asset seizure, credit reporting. All completely above board. All completely devastating to people who'd built their lives on financial fraud and borrowed time. But I didn't move immediately. Patience was my greatest weapon. I let the debt mature, let the interest compound, let the legal penalties pile up. I wanted the weight of consequences to build until it was crushing. Meanwhile, I continued building my actual business. Mrs. Henderson had introduced me to other small business owners who needed help with bookkeeping and financial planning. Word spread about the young woman who could untangle complex financial problems and improve profit margins. By my second year of college, Ember Financial Solutions was turning a legitimate profit beyond just debt collection. I moved out of my childhood home without fanfare, renting a small apartment above a used bookstore downtown. Victoria barely noticed. Maya assumed I'd finally found someone desperate enough to take me in. They were so focused on their own dramas that my absence registered as relief rather than loss. That was exactly what I wanted. Invisible until I chose to be seen. One of the most valuable lessons I learned during this period was that revenge doesn't have to be a solo act. There were other people Maya and Victoria had hurt, other victims of their selfishness and cruelty. Finding them became part of my strategy. Sarah Chan had been Maya's college roommate until Maya framed her for cheating to deflect from her own academic dishonesty. Sarah lost her scholarship and dropped out, but she'd gone on to become a successful forensic accountant. When I reached out to her with evidence of Maya's identity theft and financial fraud, she was very interested in helping with the investigation. Marcus Williams was one of Victoria's church group victims, a widower who'd invested $15,000 in Maya's non-existent modeling agency. He'd been too embarrassed to report the fraud, but he had documentation of everything. Marcus turned out to be a retired federal investigator with connections in multiple agencies. Even Mrs. Henderson became an unwitting ally. She'd been suspicious of my family situation for years, noticing my worn clothes, my reluctance to discuss home life, the way I flinched when people raised their voices. When I finally told her the truth about the boiling water incident, she connected me with her lawyer, a woman who specialized in helping abuse survivors navigate legal and financial independence. I wasn't just building a case against Maya and Victoria. I was constructing an entire network of people who had legitimate reasons to see justice served. And when you have that many people working toward the same goal, amazing things become possible. 3 years after the night Maya burned me, Victoria called. I was in my apartment, reviewing quarterly reports for Ember Financial Solutions and planning my next semester's course load, when my phone rang with a number I'd blocked and unblocked dozens of times. Elena. Victoria's voice sounded strained, older somehow. We need to talk. I set down my pen and smiled. I'd been waiting for this call. Hello, Victoria. How can I help you? Don't be smart with me, she snapped, but there was desperation underneath the anger. Maya needs a co-signer for an apartment lease. Her credit is complicated right now. Complicated. That was one way to describe what happened when federal investigators started looking into identity theft charges and social media fraud. Maya's Instagram empire had collapsed when her fake sponsorships were exposed, and several major brands were pursuing legal action for contract fraud. You want me to co-sign a lease? I repeated slowly, letting the silence stretch. For Maya. You owe us, Victoria said, her voice rising with familiar entitlement. After everything we did raising you, giving you a roof over your head, food on the table. You owe this family. The rage that filled me in that moment was pure and clean and absolutely focused. But I didn't let it show in my voice. Instead, I spoke quietly, clearly, with the confidence of someone who held all the cards. You're right, Victoria. Do owe you. I owe you exactly what you gave me. And I always pay my debts. I hung up and immediately called Sarah Chen. It's time, I told her. Send everything to the district attorney's office. Then I drafted a letter, handwritten on Ember Financial Solutions letterhead, with copies sent to Victoria, Maya, and my father. Dear Martinez family. Asterisk effective immediately. Your outstanding financial obligations have been consolidated and transferred to Ember Financial Solutions. This includes but is not limited to asterisk. Credit card debt in the amount of $47,832.16. Fraudulent loans obtained using stolen identity information. $23,400.00. Legal fees and penalties associated with identity theft charges. $31,200.00. Interest and collection costs accrued over 36 months. $18,950.00. Total amount due. $121,382.16. Asterisk payment is required within 30 days of receipt of this notice. Failure to comply will result in asset seizure, wage garnishment, and continued legal action. Asterisk. Additionally, please be advised that evidence of financial fraud, identity theft, and elder financial abuse has been forwarded to appropriate federal and state authorities. Regards, Elena Martinez, CEO. Ember Financial Solutions. Inside each envelope, I included a photograph. The same photograph I'd taken of my scarred arm 3 years ago, along with a printout of Maya's social media post about borrowing my identity. At the bottom, a yellow sticky note with Maya's own words. Oops. Accidents happen. The response was swift and beautiful in its completeness. Maya's remaining social media accounts were frozen pending federal investigation. Her bank accounts, already depleted, were seized to prevent asset concealment. The luxury car she'd been leasing was repossessed when she couldn't make payments. Her part-time job at the boutique ended when her background check revealed the pending criminal charges. Victoria's church group connections evaporated overnight when Marcus Williams quietly shared evidence of her fraud with other potential victims. The house they'd inherited from my grandmother, the house where I'd been burned and broken and dismissed, became the target of multiple lawsuits and liens. I'd been carefully acquiring these debts for months, and now I held the power to foreclose. My father's gambling debts, which I'd also purchased, gave me legal claim to his pension and social security benefits. For the first time in years, his self-destructive behavior had consequences he couldn't drink away. But the most satisfying part wasn't their financial destruction. It was watching their fake personas crumble under the weight of truth. Maya couldn't maintain her influencer facade without money for props and clothes. Victoria couldn't play the respectable church lady when everyone knew she was a fraud. My father couldn't hide in his basement when creditors were knocking on the door every day. They were being forced to face reality for the first time in their lives, and they had no idea how to handle it. 6 months after that phone call, I returned to my childhood home. Not as the broken teenager who'd crawled across these kitchen tiles with a burning arm, but as Elena Martinez, CEO of a successful financial consulting firm, college graduate with a double major in business and psychology, and the person who now held legal claim to everything they'd once called theirs. I wore a navy blue dress, the same color as the pajamas I'd been wearing the night Maya burned me, but this dress cost more than my entire wardrobe used to. My hair was professionally styled, my makeup flawless, my confidence absolute. The scar on my arm was visible but no longer hidden, a permanent reminder of what they'd done and what I'd become because of it. Maya opened the door, and the transformation was shocking. Her Instagram-perfect appearance had deteriorated into something hollow and desperate. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, her skin showing the stress of months without her usual spa treatments and cosmetic procedures. But it was her eyes that showed the real damage. They held the frantic, cornered look of someone who'd finally realized the game was over. "You," she whispered, and I could hear genuine fear in her voice. "You did this. You destroyed everything." I smiled the same polite smile I'd perfected in business meetings with clients. "Hello, Maya. You look different." Victoria appeared behind her, clutching a bathrobe that had seen better days. The woman who'd once carried herself like royalty now moved like a beaten dog, shoulders hunched, eyes darting nervously. "What do you want?" she demanded, but the imperious tone she'd once wielded like a weapon came out as a broken whisper. "I want exactly what you taught me to want," I replied, stepping into the house that smelled of desperation and unpaid bills. Nothing more, nothing less. I placed 2 legal documents on the kitchen counter, the same counter where Maya had prepared to pour boiling water on me 3 years ago. The first was a foreclosure notice. The second was a wage garnishment order that would redirect every penny they earned for the next decade toward paying their debts to me. "This is insane," Victoria said, her hands shaking as she read the documents. "You can't do this. I'm your mother. I raised you." "No," I said quietly, and my voice carried the authority of someone who'd learned to weaponize truth. "You called me garbage. You laughed while I screamed. You taught me that family means nothing, that cruelty is acceptable, that the strong destroy the weak without consequences." I pulled out my phone and played a recording I'd made that night. Maya's giggle as she said, "Oops, accidents happen," while my skin sizzled in the background, followed by Victoria's declaration that garbage deserved whatever pain it received. Maya went white. You recorded us?" "I recorded everything," I confirmed. "Every cruel word, every dismissal, every moment you made clear that I was less than human in your eyes. And now the whole world gets to hear what kind of people you really are." Victoria lunged forward, desperation making her bold. "You can't destroy us like this. We're your family." I caught her wrist easily. Months of self-defense classes had made me strong in ways they'd never expect. Family doesn't pour boiling water on children. Family doesn't steal identities and commit fraud. Family doesn't laugh at suffering they've caused. I released her wrist and straightened my dress. "But you taught me something valuable. You taught me that consequences are the only language cruel people understand. So here are yours." I handed them each a business card for Ember Financial Solutions. "Every payment you make, every dollar you earn that goes toward satisfying these debts, will fund scholarships for young women escaping abusive families. Your cruelty will literally be transformed into hope for other people." Maya started crying, ugly, desperate tears that I watched with the same detached interest she'd once shown my pain. "Please," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I was drunk that night. I didn't mean to." "You smiled," I interrupted. "You giggled. You lit a candle and turned up the TV while I writhed on the floor. That wasn't drunken accident, Maya. That was who you are." I walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at them. Two broken people in a house that would soon be sold to pay their debts to me. "You spent years trying to make me disappear. The girl you burned and dismissed and called garbage. She's gone. In her place stands someone you created through your cruelty. Someone who learned to be stronger and smarter and more patient than you ever imagined possible." I smiled one last time. "Congratulations. You built your own destroyer." Walking out of that house for the final time felt like emerging from a tomb. The afternoon sun was warm on my face, and for the first time in years, I felt completely free. Not free from anger or pain. Those would always be part of me. But free from the power they'd held over my sense of self-worth. The next 5 years exceeded every dream I'd dared to have. Ember Financial Solutions grew into a multi-million-dollar firm specializing in helping abuse survivors achieve financial independence. We offered everything from basic financial literacy courses to complex legal advocacy for people escaping dangerous situations. Our success rate was phenomenal because our entire team understood trauma from the inside out. Mrs. Henderson became my business partner, bringing her decades of small business experience to help us expand sustainably. The Phoenix Scholarship Program, funded entirely by the money Maya and Victoria were forced to pay in restitution, had helped 347 young women attend college by the time I turned 25. Sarah Chen joined our firm as Chief Forensic Accountant, bringing her expertise in financial fraud investigation. Marcus Williams became our liaison with federal agencies, helping us identify and prosecute other predatory schemes targeting vulnerable people. Even my high school guidance counselor joined our board of directors, amazed at the transformation of the quiet girl she'd once worried about. I bought a penthouse apartment downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows that filled every room with light. The opposite of the dark house where I'd grown up feeling invisible and worthless. My closet was full of beautiful clothes that I'd chosen myself, not hand-me-downs that carried other people's histories. My refrigerator was stocked with fresh food that I ate sitting at a table set for one person who mattered. The scar on my arm faded to a thin silver line, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. I never tried to hide it completely. It reminded me of something important. Pain can be transformed into power if you're patient enough and smart enough and strong enough to do the work. Maya found a job at a discount retail store, working for barely above minimum wage with her wages garnished to pay me back. I heard through mutual connections that she'd gained weight, lost her social media presence entirely, and lived in a studio apartment with a roommate who complained about her constant anxiety. Sometimes I felt something that might have been pity, but it passed quickly. She'd chosen cruelty when kindness was equally available. Victoria ended up in a senior living facility paid for by Medicaid, having lost everything through her own greed and fraud. The church group that once elevated her status banned her entirely when the extent of her financial abuse became public. She sent me letters occasionally, rambling, incoherent things about forgiveness and family obligations. I filed them carefully with all my other documentation, but I never responded. My father died in his sleep during my 3rd year of college, liver failure from decades of drinking. I attended his funeral, paid for a simple service, and felt nothing but a vague sadness for the man he might have been if he'd made different choices. His death eliminated the last of my legal obligations to any of them. But my greatest victory wasn't financial or professional. It was personal. I learned to trust people again. Mrs. Henderson introduced me to her nephew David, a teacher who worked with at-risk youth and understood the value of second chances. We'd been together 2 years now, and he'd never once made me feel like I was too damaged or too complicated or too ambitious for love. David was the first person to see my scar and ask not what happened, but how did you survive that? The difference mattered more than I could have predicted. Today, I'm 28 years old and the CEO of a company worth more than Maya ever pretended her fake lifestyle was. I own property in 3 states, drive a car that cost more than Victoria's entire fraudulent portfolio, and wear clothes that fit my body and my personality perfectly. I have friends who value my intelligence, colleagues who respect my expertise, and a man who loves me for who I am rather than despite who I was. But none of that is the real victory. The real victory is in my bathroom mirror every morning, looking at the face of a woman who refused to let cruelty define her limits. The real victory is in the scholarship recipients who send me graduation photos and thank you notes, young women who escaped situations similar to mine and built lives their abusers said were impossible. The real victory is in the financial literacy workshops we hold, teaching people that money is power and power doesn't have to corrupt, it can liberate. The real victory is that I kept my humanity while dismantling theirs. I never poured boiling water on anyone. I never laughed at someone else's pain. I never called another person garbage or treated them as less than human. The cruelty stopped with me, transformed into something constructive rather than destructive. Maya and Victoria tried to break a 17-year-old girl because they thought she was weak and worthless. Instead, they forged someone stronger than they could comprehend, someone who learned that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming everything they said you'd never be while helping others do the same. Last week, I received a letter from a young woman named Sophia who'd received our scholarship and was now applying to law school. She wrote, "You showed me that surviving abuse isn't enough. We have to thrive. We have to become the adults we needed when we were children." That night, I looked at my scar in the bathroom mirror and smiled. Not because I'd destroyed my abusers, but because I'd built something beautiful from the ashes of their cruelty. The girl who screamed on that kitchen floor was gone, but she hadn't died in vain. She'd been transformed into someone who could take the worst thing that ever happened to her and turn it into the best thing that ever happened to someone else. And that, I realized, was what real power looked like. The phoenix doesn't rise from ashes to destroy the fire that burned it. It rises to prove that even the most devastating flames can't prevent something beautiful from being born. Maya poured boiling water on her sister and expected her to disappear. Instead, she created a CEO, a scholarship program, a financial empire, and proof that cruelty, no matter how carefully planned, is no match for patience, intelligence, and the refusal to become what hurt you. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting everything they said you'd never deserve, then using it to make sure no one else has to suffer the way you did. They tried to burn me down. Instead, they taught me how to rise.